Thank you for joining Sertl Optics 360 Pulse. I am your host, Jennifer Sertl, Director of Marketing at Sertl Optics. 360-degree imaging is part of everyday life, and Sertl Optics technology is being designed to accelerate the delivery of life-saving resources, ensure aerospace safety, and increase immersive experience participation. This podcast, 360 Pulse, is dedicated to featuring immersive technology and the innovators that are working on those capabilities. Today's guest is Ken Stewart, President and Chief Executive Officer of NUAIR. But before I formally welcome Ken to our program, I want to make sure all of you are familiar with NUAIR. NUAIR manages the operations of the FAA-designated New York UAS test site at Griffiss International Airport in Rome, New York, on behalf of Oneida County. There are only 7 of these FAA-designed sites, and we're really excited to have it here. It's responsible for the advancement of New York's 50-mile UAS Corridor between Rome and Syracuse, New York. And so now I can talk a little bit about Ken Stewart, who's actually the President and Chief Operating Officer, going on almost 2.5 years, almost 3 years. Prior to joining NUAIR, Ken Stewart held several leadership positions at General Electric, including the CEO of Aeros, a GE aviation company, where he led innovation, development, and commercialization of unmanned traffic management services, and managing director at GE Ventures, overseeing the new business creation function for GE. Prior to that, Ken had worked in several executive roles with several venture capital and private equity-backed companies, commercializing and scaling pre-revenue startups and transforming organizations for growth. He's served on the boards of New York Aviation Management Association, as well as the Commercial Drone Alliance. These are organizations that work with federal policymakers and industry stakeholders to help create relevant rules to scale commercial UAS and advancement in air mobility operations. Ken, it's amazing to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Oh, very glad to be here. Thank you.
So in terms of the types of questions, I kind of broke them into 2 things. One is very NUAIR-centric, and then I'd like to widen the conversation to the macro of the emerging market of UAVs in general. Is that okay with you?
That's perfect.
Okay, perfect. So, wow, you have a dynamic background. And for those who don't know you, can you share your path before joining NUAIR? And then also, what is your vision for NUAIR?
Sure. So that's a little bit of a long and winding road. But as you mentioned, I was at GE Ventures, which then moved over to GE Aviation. Prior to that, I spent most of my career in the telecommunications space, private equity, venture capital-based backed companies. When we created the organization within GE Ventures, Larry Culp had come in and taken over and kind of did away with the ventures, which moved us into aviation, which unfortunately was kind of the beginning of the end. A big $36 billion engine company with a little software development company. They're called Aeros. And once COVID happened, unfortunately, they pretty much turned the business off. And in doing so, I noticed, and I'd worked with NUAIR since 2017 when I was part of GE. I had reached out to the organization here and found out they were looking for a CEO. So the timing was perfect. They were winding it down, and I was looking for a spot. So it was a perfect opportunity to jump in. Never having done nonprofit work before, so I'm learning here every day.
That's amazing. And then can you go into what your vision is now that you've been able to kind of get in, see the landscape, see the stakeholders, shareholders, and all that jazz?
Sure. So this the last 18 months and probably the next 12 months are really transformational for NUAIR. In the past, people really knew us as, hey, we manage an FAA-designated test site. But what we're really trying to do now is transform into really a trusted, incredible service provider. Like NUAIR will usher in the next generation of UAS and AAM for the safety, societal, and economic benefit of New York State and beyond. And that has really turned our focus back on the state to help them to integrate UAS operations for public safety, Department of Transportation, Port Authority, Power Authority, and even organizations like Syracuse Airport to help them start understanding how they're going to put the infrastructure in place for both UAS and advanced air mobility.
Wow. Are there any success stories or case studies where NUAIR's testing and services have made a significant impact on the industry, or any specific industries that have really benefited already from the NUAIR's expertise?
Yeah, so I think a couple areas. I'm just going to preface this by saying, we're not really scaling in this industry yet because, some of our regulatory moves at a glacial pace, if at all. So that's really kind of hindered this industry. But in terms of understanding for the FAA, for them to interpret this information for regulations, we played a major role. We've been in the rulemaking committees, the aviation rulemaking committees for remote ID, for beyond visual line of sight, and now we're in the counter UAS rulemaking committee. But on the commercial side, we focused with, for example, a company called AVSS, that's actually a Genius New York program company, to be able to help commercialize the parachutes that they've developed for drones. And while, without thinking about why do parachutes matter with drones, the outcome of what they've been able to provide is the ability for drones to fly operations over people. So you won't ever think about, well, why is a parachute that important for a drone until you think about the application for it. And so by us validating that with them, I think we validated up to 2 or 3 drones now. They can now package that up as a system for these manufacturers to be able to now sell that drone to perform operations that may take place over people.
So that's a really, really great example. I think sometimes what's underrepresented in the UAV market is the idea of public safety and also life-saving capabilities. We are working with aerial robotics, and they are, working to get medical supplies in hard-to-reach places, and ridiculous national disasters and windstorms and that sort of thing. So how are you working with state and national agencies to increase safety and also really support this technology for good?
Sure. So that's a great question. So most, the fastest growing sector of this industry is first responders and adoption of UAS. And, so we work very closely with Department of Homeland Security, Emergency Services out in Oriskany. And today we've trained over 2,200 people at that facility in UAS integration. So how they fly UAS. We've done 140, I think, COAs, waivers, so that's like tactical, beyond visual line of sight, flying at night, COAs for their operations, methods and procedures for their operations for 140 agencies in the state. So, we are very much focused on drones for good. We're not necessarily we're not really into it for enabling the deliver of a burrito. We're into it for delivering, healthcare quality, ensuring that police can do, accident recreation, search and rescue, all the things that they need for emergency response.
The other thing that you're making me think of is how important safety is for UAS operations. How does NUAIR address safety concerns such as air traffic management, collision avoidance, cybersecurity, and in the UAS testing and service it provides?
So that's a lot in that question to unpack.
I'm trying to maximize this time I have with you.
Well, I'll say this. We just wrapped up a month worth of testing with the FAA. The reports aren't out yet, but we're essentially doing unmanned traffic management field trials where we're doing real-time deconfliction, what they call tactical deconfliction, which is giving other aircraft priority over other UAS and then real-time deconflicting that. So if we launched a medical or say a first responder type of drone, while there was another flight already taking place, we were real-time deconflicting those with our unmanned traffic management platform. And we brought together, I think it was 4 different USSs in the country to peer those devices so that we did with multiple providers to illustrate back to the FAA exactly how they can start interpreting those standards and performance-based characteristics going forward. Now, as all those come together and you connect those different platforms, it's just like federating the internet. You've got to have some level of cybersecurity. And so we help inform the FAA. We also look to the FAA. We work with NASA to help come up with what those best practices are.
And is there, I'm just thinking of loss of sleep. I'm wondering, what are the 3 most important FAA governance issues that keep you up at night? I do hear that it's moving slowly, but if you had your wish list, what are the top 3 issues? And again, I know you do an incredible job of representing the region.
So, we meet with the FAA just about every Friday. Like I said, we were on the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Rulemaking Committee. And that's probably the holy grail right there. Being able to get those regulations across the table are probably the biggest goal we wish we could have tomorrow. And, from what we understand from the FAA, we're probably looking at another 3 years of rulemaking before that rule is probably finalized. And that is really the key piece to scaling. The next piece is probably more performance-based standards for unmanned traffic management. I would say the FAA has probably done a pretty good job of putting a lot of those companies out of business because we don't have performance standards, and we've seen a lot of those companies go by the wayside. A lot of investment in this space, without a lot of productivity and commercial customers. The third piece is probably this framework for trusted autonomy. And what I mean by that is you kind of touched on this a little bit with the cyber standards, but it's more than just that. In unmanned traffic management is very different than your traditional ATM, which is all on-prem, private, local loop, all managed under one umbrella. The way USSs and the unmanned traffic management systems come together is much more like internet-based. We get obstacle data from somebody, we get weather data from somebody. All these things are coming together and they all have different sources. And how do we create a framework of trust so that we know the data is good, it has a level of veracity to it, that you can trust it, and there's no malware or no bad intent coming from any of those providers or people that provide the data to them. And those are the things that I don't know that the FAA is actually equipped to do because they're very focused on manned traffic and how they develop that industry. I'm not so sure the personnel that are there now understand this federated universe that we're moving to.
As I was listening to you, I think I lost a sentence because I was still stuck on the phrase, the framework of trust that you're talking about. NUAIR has partnerships with various stakeholders, including government agencies, industry partners, and academia. Can you discuss some of the collaborative efforts that NUAIR is involved in and their significance in advancing UAS technology and applications?
Sure. I'll give you one that we've done probably every year for the last 5 years. So I mentioned we work very closely with Department of Homeland Security Emergency Services here. So every year we have a UAS summit and we invite all of the public safety agencies, including DOT and Thruway Authority, Power Authority, and some of those other agencies, to be able to support demonstrations so they can see what's available to them in the market today. So, there's a lot of different drones out there. They all have a sales slick, but do they all actually perform to the level that they should? We try to work with industry to boil up the cream of the crop and have those people come and demonstrate. So the art of the possible is achievable by these agencies. And so it's a full day. They have a full day that they actually host at their facility. And the second day we do a flying demo or a service or a software demo at Rome Airport. That's generally about an 8 or 9 hour day. No politicians allowed, just first responders and public safety agents allowed to come and just interact with the service providers.
And is that, once the date has been set, will that be available on your website? Or is it private invitation only?
It is by invitation only. Mm-hmm. We do expand it to other people occasionally, just, for people that want to come and kind of observe what's happening. Yeah. But it really depends on the role. We try to make this day all about public safety and our state agencies, so they can come and have kind of a stress-free, worry-free environment, see the actual units go do the things that they want to see them do in the field, helps them with their procurement process. And then we can also help them when they go through their procurement process, say, can you please help us put this, RF whatever out on the street to be able to procure the right piece of equipment. Yeah,
no, that's amazing.
I can't tell you how many times they've come to us after they've acquired something and say, hey, we think we have a problem with something. Yeah.
Is that called,
do before?
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the word? Is that called post-diligence versus, due diligence? I don't know what that kind of diligence is called. But so I am going to pivot more towards UAV emerging market and kind of widening the scope of the conversation. So the UAV emerging market is creating so many new jobs. How are you working to support the future workforce?
Sure. So one of the things that was kind of eye-opening for me here was when Micron, decided to come and open shop here, and I sat in some of the workforce development initiatives, and it made me reflect on kind of what NUAIR's responsibility is to the state. If we're under the umbrella of opening the drone economy for the state, we need to support a workforce. We need to develop a workforce for that. Now, good news is, long before I got here, Tony Basil had already worked with the Syracuse Educational District to set up a STEM program for students here. But we need to expand that. And so we just kicked off a curriculum course with Lemoyne College, and we're going to expand that it's going to include Madison, Oneida, and Onondaga counties, that we're going to have at least one program in every county now to start developing not just UAS pilots, but people that understand GIS, LiDAR, how to interpret the data that comes off of drones. So really start developing a workforce that can stand behind this. And a good example as to why that's necessary is working with the New York Thruway Authority. a year ago, when we first started working with them, they trained 2 pilots. They're now up to 22 pilots. And that's just in 12 months. That's one agency. So DOT manages 5 times the number of bridges that the Highway Authority does. So it's going to be interesting to see where they start looking for the workforce, and hopefully that's going to be right here in New York.
You know, you have such a unique background from being both at GE, that's fairly sophisticated from a, design perspective, and then also being involved kind of with their, emerging markets and all of that. What advice do you have for UAV startup founders in navigating the challenges of developing and commercializing cutting edge UAV technologies?
Focus on your core strengths. Don't chase any of the shiny things, and spend your money wisely, because it's still going to be some time before this industry scales. Until the regulations come out, scale is going to be really hard. I mean, you see it right now. I think we just saw the law passed in Florida where Ron DeSantis says no more Chinese drones. So I support that 100%. But I will tell you that the drones we have that are available that are manufactured in the U.S. still aren't up to the capability and scale that those things, that the Chinese units can, because they've got a 10-year advantage of building and developing. So, but focus on a market, execute on that market. But that would be my advice.
It reminds me of, Jim Collins' Good to Great, focusing on the hedgehog, identifying the hedgehog. And so that's, I think we want some secret sauce that isn't the hard work of really focusing on the core. That is one of the biggest challenges I think we have as a startup, for sure.
Well, I give one other piece of advice, and it's a book called Play Bigger, and it's mandatory reading for every employee here. And play bigger means focus on your core, because when you focus on your core, you out execute everybody else, and you gather the economics of that vertical. And if you think about, search, that's Google, right? I guarantee you they get 80% of the search that's out there today. And so if you're gonna build a unit, look at where the market has a vacancy or a void, focus on it, execute it, and get the economics of that market sector.
That's so exciting. I mean, play bigger, everyone. I think that'll be next on my reading list. Oh my gosh, my reading list is so crazy. I'm reading also have you ever heard of The Human Element?
No, I haven't.
It's a book about why innovation is so hard, and some of the psychological blocks towards innovation in organizations. So maybe if we can play bigger, it'll help us embrace. Anyway, I'm thinking there's a connection between the human element and playing bigger, which is great. I think we could talk for so much time, but I think my last question is, I think no matter what technology you're in or whoever's listening, leadership is something that we all have a role to play. And so as a CEO, how do you foster a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship within NUAIR, and the strategies and approaches that you can offer deep tech founders in how to implement their culture of innovation?
Yeah, so, I think one of the things that we've really focused on for the past 12 months is who we are as an organization. I kind of just talked a little about this, the playing bigger kind of mantra, but it really was, so we like to play the Ocean Connery method here to really focus on what our vision, how do we execute that, what's transformational for the organization. We work back from that, determine what's strategic for us this year to execute. We monitor every single month, so that if there's a variance in the market, we know it, we can pivot if needed. So it's really just understanding your business. And the other part I would say is, I really force the decision-making down throughout to the lowest level of the organization whenever possible, because that's the boots on the street. They're out there, they know what's going on. They've got to feed that information back up. And if there's something that needs to change, you've got to listen to your team, and you have to build that trust. There's 2 pillars that we have here: noble intent and transparency. They'll serve you for the rest of your life. And those are things that we institute here. But I think really it's, it comes down to enabling the organization to make decisions. All of us aren't always here. We're not always going to be here. Changes happen in organizations. You've got to empower the organization to be this living, breathing thing, whether, the CEO is here or not.
Well, speaking of CEOs, my CEO and the founder of Sertl Optics just sent one more question. So I know I said that was the last question, but I'm going to ask one more. He says, deep tech startups often face longer product development cycles and market adoption timelines. How did NUAIR navigate the timeline challenges associated with UAS testing and integration? What advice do you have for other founders dealing with similar issues in their industries? Zach Niazi.
Yeah, I think we're still struggling with that a little bit, to be honest with you. Like I said, we're kind of transformational now. that's a tough question to answer. It really is. He's right. Especially now with what's happened at SVB and the fact that VCs have a bunch of dry powder, but they're very focused on where their returns are going to be now. That money is going to get tighter and tighter. You have to have a compelling story in a market. I was talking to somebody recently and they were like, we have, 80% margins on our business. Everybody should be looking to buy this organization. And I said, how big's the market? And when they told me how big the market was, I was like, why would a VC put their money into it? It really is a struggle. And I would say this for everybody developing new tech: know your market, know the financials and the economics of that market. If somebody is going to give you $1 million, they're expecting 200 million back, not 20. So I can tell you firsthand at GE, we had at the time probably 20 billion investment. We put $1 billion opportunity on the table for that. That was a well thought through business case. And they said they loved the idea, a $1 billion business case with 80% margins. And they came back and said, it's not big enough. And I was like, okay, well, then give me 100 million. If I give you $1 billion off of 20 million, then, let's just quadruple that. So those are the challenges. They're real challenges. And there's no formula for overcoming them except knowing the economics and the opportunity you're bringing back. These VCs don't have a problem with deal flow. They have a problem with quality deal flow.
That's a really neat way to say that. That's amazing. So, there's so much here. I'm thinking focus on your core, be sure that you have a compelling story, create a framework of trust, and play bigger. All of this from Ken Stewart, NUAIR's president and CEO. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you joining us today. We'd like to thank the Institute of Optics, Genius New York, Luminate Accelerator, AFWorks, Cider Technologies, Archangel Imaging, and AUVSI. Special mention to our producer, Scott Fitzgerald at RockFox Studios in the heart of optics expertise in Rochester, New York. By all means, I hope you listen and subscribe to our program. Find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We are so interested in how immersive technology positively impacts safety and human connection. And if you know a story we should feature or a guest that can further this conversation, let me know. You can reach me at jennifer@sertloptics.com. Thank you for joining us.